Morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, hosted by Connecticut Main Street Center. Today's webinar is a case study on how Beatrice, Nebraska fought apathy. My name is Kristen Lopez, the Education Training Director here at Connecticut Main Street Center. Today, we're discussing negative perception and the journey to turn that around. We hear this from all over the state that negative perception is a major challenge. The ingrained beliefs that there's nothing to do downtown, or it is not safe, or it wasn't like this when. These are challenges that are definitely not unique to Connecticut, and we're going to go dive into that today. But before we begin our presentation, just a few words. Connecticut Main Street Center is the expert resource for developing and sustaining vibrant downtowns and main streets that fuel our state's prosperity. We all know that a great downtown when we see it. It's a feeling and energy. We can sense it, see it, experience it. But it can be hard to articulate what exactly makes a main street great. But we've broken it down into 6 qualities to make it easier to grasp. The main street is connected by multiple modes of transportation for people to access. It is welcoming, friendly, and inclusive to all. In place are sustainable practices that bring life and vibrancy. Small businesses are supported and encouraged, as well as real estate development and business recruitment. There is a unique sense of place. And there is a dedicated Main Street management model. You'll hear us emphasize this over and over again. And so it is our mission to assess, educate, and convene around these qualities of a vibrant downtown so that main streets all around our state can develop, grow, and prosper. And we couldn't do this work without our sponsors and funding partners. Connecticut Main Street Center's founding sponsors are Eversource and the state of Connecticut's Department of Economic and Community Development. Our educational programs are sponsored by Webster Bank and Avangrid, with thanks to our corporate investors, Penn Globe and Capital for Change. Some quick housekeeping notes. This webinar will be about an hour long. We'll stop at the end for questions, but please type in your questions along the way so we can address them at the end. And when you exit this webinar, you will get a link to an evaluation for the survey. So please take a moment to complete it. It really helps us develop more meaningful educational programming for you. And with that, I am very excited to introduce our guest speaker today. When I started to research this topic, I came across a blog post in Main Street America written by our guest speaker titled "Fighting Back Against Apathy, the Beatrice, Nebraska Approach to Defeating Negativity." We'll link it into the chat for you to read after the presentation. I almost immediately reached out to Michael Sothan because of how relatable the challenges he faced in Beatrice are so similar to Connecticut's, and the advice that he gave was very practical and useful. So with that, I'm very pleased to have Michael, the Executive Director of Main Street Beatrice, with us today. He has been with the Main Street Beatrice since 2013 and has been part of Downtown Beatrice's efforts to become listed on the National Register of Historic Places, undertakes facade improvement programs, and regularly guides downtown improvements, events, and economic development efforts. Thanks so much for joining us, Michael. I'll stop sharing my screen and you can share yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Kristen. We'll get this real quick transferred over to the other PowerPoint, and glad to join you all this morning. Let me get this started here. But yes, as Kristen said, I'm Michael Sothan. I've been here in Beatrice, Nebraska in this role for right at about 10 years. And, it's been a unique opportunity to be a part of Main Street. I really wasn't a part of this previously. Did not come from a strict economic development background, but have always been involved with community development in one way or another, and really come from more of a history background. And so, as you guys were talking about is in the nice intro, talking about the issues of apathy, of negativity, it often is really a question that I think we're oftentimes facing. And for us, when I got into this role, the question became, what are we doing here? Because what happens when a community no longer has confidence in itself? When I started trying to make efforts to improve our downtown, I would be talking to folks, and at the local bakery, I'd be hearing things like, well, but downtown's dying, or at the coffee shop, well, downtown just isn't what it used to be, or, our community just isn't the same. I wish we could go back to, and, they would then go on and tell a story. And so that idea of what was really impacting what could be in Beatrice, Nebraska. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard those conversations. You might still see that. Maybe you've got a neighborhood watch type Facebook group that seems to dive into negativity more than some of the other aspects of your community. But that's certainly what we were facing here. And when a community story is no longer one of pride, is no longer one of promise and just being excited about its future, that really is a challenge. And so for us, one of the first things that I realized to be successful in my role of helping Main Street Beatrice and helping grow our downtown was that we really needed to fight back against apathy and really try to change that conversation. And as part of that, I definitely need to say that understanding that whole conversation that was taking part was really important to me, because I'm often an optimist. I think a lot of us that are in economic development, community development work, we often are a little more optimistic. We see the positives, we see the opportunities that exist. We're part of the conversation of how our communities can improve, how things are going. We're talking with that new business owner. We're there at that project site of that new renovation, those types of things. And so we're in a little bit more of the know. But the thing that I think we oftentimes have to understand is that other people don't necessarily see that. There's this word cloud in front of you. This is a word cloud that we ask the question, when you think of downtown Beatrice, what words describe it for you? This was in 2017. And you guys can see what I'm seeing. You see words like outdated, rundown properties, empty spaces, dilapidated, declining, dying, vacant buildings. Yes, there's a few positives in there. Opportunity, but there's not a whole lot. I mean, clean, you see a few, but then you see other things that are kind of against that. And so this is something that really was eye-opening to me, was finally asking members of our community, what is that perception? What do you think of downtown Beatrice? What do you think of Beatrice in general? And once I understood that this was that reality, man, that really was able to help us craft how we were going to try to tackle this. And so understanding where people are coming from is really a pathway to change, because these negative ideas, all those things that you were seeing, those were truly barriers. They were very much impacting our ability to try to see growth, to try to see change. We had someone that was wanting to be an entrepreneur, and they were telling their friends, hey, I think I'm going to open up a business. I think I'm going to start it downtown. And they would start talking, and they would immediately be bombarded with, well, what about the parking? Well, that's never succeeded before, or all these different things of negativity. And it really darkened the conversation. It really suppressed the idea of people wanting to do things. That word cloud, I'm going to real quick go back to it. This question was asked a few months after we had a building that collapsed in our downtown. We had a 2-story brick building that its roof fell in on the second floor, which then fell in on the first floor and into the basement. And while that was kind of the headline, people said, well, yeah, that's just what our downtown's going to be. We had some other smaller rural communities around us that had been having some real problems with dilapidation. And everyone says, that's the path that we're on. You can just see it. And so we had to understand that that's where people were, and that truly their perception of all this negative stuff that I just talked about wasn't unfounded. because they were seeing some of the blight. They were seeing a building collapse. They were thinking of what was also. Well, I remember when JCPenney's used to be downtown. I remember when this department store used to be downtown. Beatrice, Nebraska, we were relatively young compared to you guys. We were founded in 1857, kind of one of the older communities in Nebraska. And for most of Beatrice's grown-up life, especially the early part of the 19th century, we were the third largest town in Nebraska. Omaha, Lincoln, Beatrice, Nebraska. We were competing industrially with communities like Omaha, Nebraska, like Kansas City, Missouri, and things like that. This community had a power that far outsized what it was. But really, since World War II, our population has stagnated. We've been at that 12 to 14,000 people range that entire time. We don't have an interstate that runs through our community. And so things started to shift. These generations of people that had grown up with a manufacturing business that their grandfather and maybe their uncle and their son had all worked at, those were no longer there. Same with the department stores. And so these ideas of what Beatrice used to be was really dominating people's minds. They were not seeing the fact that we had actually, even though that business that had started here in the 1800s and closed in 2008, it had been replaced, even though those 500 jobs were now taken up in some other different industries that we economically, we were actually a very vibrant community. The perception was, look at what we've lost. And that was very deep, and it ran really deep into the core of our community because we were truly like a Rust Belt town. That's exactly the way that people really saw us as, oh my goodness, we've lost so much. And in some ways that's true, but they were losing sight of what we had also gained along the way. But at the end of the day, perception is reality. And looking at that word cloud, we knew that we couldn't just, oh, those are those negative people. This was entrenched. I mean, the idea that our community wasn't what it used to be and couldn't really regain its, I don't know, glory isn't the right word, but its step, its swagger is certainly a problem. And it truly was that barrier to growth. And we could not just brush that aside. We knew we had to be very purposeful. We had to be very direct in our steps to try to address that. And for us, it truly came back to, we needed to fight back. It wasn't just that, oh, we really needed to kind of go to war with that perception, but in a kind way. We had to make a plan. And for Beatrice, and I don't know, maybe some of your communities have dealt with this, we all have local politics, we all have local personalities. One of the things that had happened with the growing apathy that was in our community and that negativity was that community organizations had really splintered. Main Street Beatrice, we've been around since 1996. Well, the chamber's been here far longer than that. The city's been here, the county government, our school, our county economic development. Nobody was working together. Honestly, there was a lot of divisions. There was a lot of headbutting. There was a lot of distrust. Everyone kind of had their own little silo, was trying to find its own little bit of success, making sure that they took credit for things, and that if someone else took credit, they actually got upset and kind of drug other people through the mud. Luckily, when I got here, we had several people that were in new positions. We had a new school superintendent. We had a new chamber director. I was new. Our county economic development group had been squashed and then brought back to life. And so we had a lot of new faces. And thank goodness all of us decided to put the past behind us. We said, why are we fighting each other when we have a community that we can be serving? And so we started just simple things. We started going out to lunch ourselves and talking about this problem, bringing other people, kind of broadening that circle. We had people that would come up to us as we're sitting there having lunch together and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe Main Street and the chamber, you guys are sitting at the same lunch table. How's this even possible? Comments like that. You can just see where the apathy had stretched into so many different things. But we started building a team. We started talking regularly. We decided that we needed to come up with a plan jointly. we were able to put some data into that to kind of help make that plan a little more centered in reality. Although I don't know if any of you guys struggle with this, but certainly in our more rural areas, data is sometimes hard to come by. But being able to have enough data, talking with people, sometimes that data is just talking to people out on the streets, talking to your property owners, your business owners. Even that word cloud was an element of data that we needed to be able to put into our plan. And then taking action. Doesn't matter what your plan is, but being able to start taking action steps, no matter how small, and keep that process going. And what we've really discovered for us is it didn't matter how big of a plan it was. At the end of the day, it's going to take people to revitalize our buildings. It's going to take people to start businesses. It's going to take people to buy into this plan. And we needed to get it so that people believed in Beatrice, Nebraska again. And that was our very first step. And so definitely change happens once people start to believe. So what were some of our first steps? And I'm not going to dwell on these too long because each community is going to be unique in its own way. We had not had a real strong marketing message. Frankly, all the marketing around our community was pretty negative. The news stories were Beatrice 6, a murder case from the 1980s that we owed something like $30 million on, and just stuff like that. It was just really negative stuff. So we said, why don't let's change a little bit. So let's start crafting our own message. And so we worked together, the school, the city, the chamber, economic development, us, and we created a community brand. Beatrice, stake your claim. Well, some of you might be looking at that like, what in the world? We are the site of America's first homestead. So the very first, the national park called Homestead National Monument of America, actually recently renamed to Homestead National Historical Park, is located right here in our town. And it's the site of America's first homestead claim, as we were looking at trying to populate the American West for the most part. And so it was something that was unique to us. Stake your claim. And that stretched to so many different things, whether that was graduating high school, or it was starting a business, it was fixing up your property, it was so many different things. It was something that worked for us at that time. Another simple step, Facebook, social media. We knew that we had people that were, as they always say, negativity overwhelms positivity. So we knew we needed to somehow start crafting messages that would start to at least equal, if not exceed, all that negativity that was out there. And we realized social media was the most cost-effective way for us to get our own stories out there. And something our town had never done before was take on a facade grant. We knew that the aesthetics of our downtown was our downtown's the welcome mat, it's the front door of the community in most cases. But we had buildings that hadn't been painted since the American Centennial in 1976. Okay. And so we decided, let's use CDBG funds instead of doing a water project or a new street like our city liked to do. Let's leverage it to do a facade program. And so we did our first facade program that started in 2017 and started really making some transformations. And that change really did start to take shape. And for us, it didn't matter how small. Maybe it's just, hey, look, we've got new plants downtown. It's springtime, just in time for Mother's Day. Come check out the new plants that are downtown. Little tiny messages like that to that new facade. We had two big corner buildings, all these different things. It didn't matter if it was small or big. We needed to be able to tell that story and get that ball rolling, because we realized that we started gaining momentum. And it was amazing once we had a little bit of momentum, how much more momentum we started to gain. So change does start to happen when people believe. And for us, we did find that success is possible. In downtown Beatrice, we now have home to 180 businesses. That's a net gain of 31 shops since 2016. So told you about that word cloud. That word cloud, that question was asked at the end of 2016, came out in like January of 2017. Since that word cloud came out, we've had a net gain of 31 shops, over 200 jobs that have been added just in our downtown area. Just in the last 5 years, we've seen over 100 improvement projects. Sometimes that's as simple as a little bit of paint. Maybe it's a new sign or a new awning, to major renovations. We've seen $12.5 million worth of improvements. And this truly has started to change and challenge people on what is possible and challenge them in a good way. Because it went from downtown is dying, there's no chance. You guys remember that word cloud, to, oh my goodness, look at what's possible. And we actually had people that were getting so excited, people that were starting to do improvement projects, starting businesses, expanding businesses that just a few years prior had no intention of doing so. And so that was super exciting. It started to really unlock that local investment. But I'm going to take a quick pause and just say, how many of you guys feel overwhelmed? Even with that, wow, it's amazing. Yeah, so they added 30 businesses. You saw 100 improvement projects in the last 5 years. But can that really happen here? How am I going to be a part of that? I've got to run this fundraiser next week, and I've got a board that wants this report, and our city council needs me to get this to them. And so you may be asking yourself, that's great, Michael, but truly, how do I get started with this? How do I break through to even get the ball rolling? Because that's frankly where I was before we started this process. And it is sometimes as simple as just telling your story. And truly, as I said earlier, understanding others. It can be as simple as just a few images and truly getting smiles on people's faces and capturing that. Talking about what's happening, not just keeping it internally, but actually getting it out there where other people have a sense of what's going on. Include them, broaden that circle. For us, it was about creating a plan. And I'm not going to go through our entire transformation strategy and some of our market developments that came out, because each community is different, but we had a plan. And we knew that we had a reason why we were working things in a certain direction. But at the end of the day, we knew that our community had the power to change itself. We weren't going to wait for some big developer from outside of Beatrice to come in, or some big giant grant to come and save us, or something like that. If we were going to make a change, for it to be sustainable and for it to be the most impactful, it needed to come from within. So unlocking that power from within our own community. And so the simplest thing I can say to how do I get started is just don't be afraid to take the first step. Maybe it's as simple as a small mural. Maybe it is as simple as just creating a few Facebook templates and really trying to push forward a different view that's positive and vibrant of your community. Maybe it's talking to that group that invites you to come speak to Kiwanis or Sertoma or something like that. It can start with fairly small things. Yes, it takes time, but you can create people that start to share that load with you, that start to become cheerleaders in their own way. So what's next for us here in Beatrice? For us, we definitely need to create a more sustainable financial investment. We've seen some great success, but how do we keep that success rolling? And a lot of it is really unlocking the potential of our people again. It's combating apathy with that plan, but it's really about focusing on people. As I said earlier, without people, if someone doesn't believe, they're not going to open a business. If someone doesn't believe, they're not going to invest in their property. They're not going to even really have interest in even selling it to the next generation, right? So unlocking the power of our own folks and getting people to believe in what we're talking about, it's focusing on place, because at the end of the day, that truly does have a huge impact. When people say that your downtown is the welcome mat, the front door of your community, it's true. Our downtown looks tired. It looked even more tired before, but we're making great strides. But being able to make those changes had such just even a little bit of paint. Sometimes it needs far more than paint, but it has a much farther reach than you would even think. So being able to make some of those changes to place and just letting people see place in a different way. We're finding new ways to be engaged. That Stake Your Claim brand, it's starting, it's now approaching almost 10 years old at this point, not quite. But so we're going to kind of re-envision ourselves. We're looking at refreshing ourselves, staying engaged, asking other people to be engaged with us and trying some new things. But at the end of the day, like I said earlier, it's about fighting back against apathy. It truly is a fight. And at the end of the day, our goal is to win back our community. And to do so, And I think we largely have in many ways. It's not definitely never over. It's definitely not mission accomplished, but it is about having fun. It's about loving our places. It's not about not giving up. I never thought this building that's in the background, Main Street Beatrice, now owns it. It's a 50,000 square foot building that became vacant last April. Formerly was a 110 room hotel. For the last 40, 50 years, it's been a senior living facility with 60 units. And it was a big setback. When it became vacant, it's right at the corner. It's the prime intersection of our downtown. I never thought in a million dreams of being in this job that we would take on, that our first property that we'd ever own would be something so big as this. But the community has had confidence in us. Our city government is supporting us and we're working together. But it started years ago to set us up to now we have the ability to interrupt the cycle of disinvestment. And we are able to try to fight back and create a positive outcome out of something that was so negative, a building that's become empty. And pretty soon we'll have new development happening there. And so what are the lessons learned? For me, one of the first things that I had to learn was finding that forest through the trees. I don't know if you guys in your Main Street role or any of your other community development roles, it's easy to say, well, I've got this report that's tomorrow. I've got to get this fundraiser done. That's, get things done for that. It's in 2 weeks. I got to find the sponsor for this. I got to make sure that these bills are paid, that the next board meeting, that everyone's ready, that I answer this email and I answer that email and I get this phone call made. And I need to go take some pictures to make sure I have social media posts planned out. That's all great. We need to do all those things. But sometimes we lose sight of what the end goal is. Sometimes we forget about those aspects of our plan and how we are working ourselves along through that. I have to remind myself of that all the time. Working together makes things so much easier. As I told you, we were not working together prior to me arriving here, and it's not because I changed it. It was very fortunate for me. It made it easier that a lot of us were fresh faces. But even if they aren't fresh faces, somebody's got to take that first step and say, hey, can we work together on this? And sometimes it's swallowing your pride. And sometimes you're going to feel a little overshadowed and overstepped by somebody who's maybe taking credit for something you were a part of. And sometimes you have to be okay with that, because at the end of the day, if you keep your head down and you keep working, people are going to recognize the successes that you had. And working together will get that ball rolling so much faster. So sometimes we have to swallow our pride. Sometimes we have to be the first one to make that ask of saying, hey, I know things haven't always been great. How can we move past that? Making a plan. Again, data, I think, is really important. I know that those of you that are part of Main Street, that's certainly a big focus of some of the transformation strategies, is being more deliberate. We have to be more strategic. We have to be more deliberate. We don't have resources to carry forward these plans is quite finite. So we need to make sure that the things that we're doing are helping push us into that end goal of those plans. One of the biggest things that I learned is that you just have to start taking action. It may not be the right action. In a year or two, you may change that. Our community branding is starting to change. We're not necessarily as wedded to it as we used to be, but it was such an impactful thing when we first got started with it. So sometimes it just takes that first step. Again, it might be a mural. People might tell you, why are you spending money on a mural? We have buildings that are dilapidated. But that $5, $10, $15, $20,000 for that mural, whatever it might be, however big, however small, has an impact that sometimes is far beyond the money that's spent on that. So start taking action, no matter how small. Definitely know that setbacks will happen. This article that I wrote came out in January of 2020. Guess what happened a month later? Talk about a huge disruption and setback. That big building that I just talked about, there's been so many setbacks along this path for us. I don't know how many times I've burned out, that I've just been like, oh my goodness, why am I still doing this? Why is this not? So know that these things will happen, and that it's okay that those things happen, and that you can re-energize. You can take time for yourself. You can take a step back, find that forest through the trees again, and start moving back forward. And lastly, be honest and be positive. Positivity overpowers apathy so very well, but it has to be authentic. It has to be real, because people will cut through, pardon my language here, but the bullshit pretty fast. If they don't think that what you're talking about is rooted in truth, they're going to cut through that and they will never buy in. And so being honest, being positive, and continuing that, not getting discouraged, really starts to quell apathy and negativity, because other people start to join in with you. We also had an issue where I was being so positive for a while. Things were going really good right after our first facade grant, that I had a lot of people saying, well, mission's accomplished. We don't need to spend any more effort. We don't need to put any more dollars into downtown. We don't need to do this and that because mission accomplished. Guess what? We had a second building that collapsed. We have lots of other issues that we're still fighting through. So mission is not accomplished, but I slightly overplayed that positivity to the point that people started refocusing in other areas, which is fine, but we needed to make sure that we didn't lose focus with what we were trying to work on as well. And so hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to share our story here in Beatrice. There's so much more to that story I could tell, but want to be respectful of all of your guys' time. And I'm sure you guys probably have questions maybe for me as well.
Thank you so much, Michael. What a rich conversation. So much wisdom in there. So let's start opening up for questions, but I definitely have some questions as well as we get some feedback in there. So many points of your presentation really stuck out to me. One of the first things is really this need to accept that perception is reality and to just embrace there's a lot of negativity. And just in our previous conversations, you had talked about kind of like a turning point was an article that was written. Can you just briefly touch on that?
Yeah. I thank you for reminding me about that. But yeah, something that I have in my office is I actually have an article that I've got set up where I end up saying, where it actually is our local newspaper editor, and they say, apathy is killing our community. And they very much called out apathy. And they didn't go in as much detail as I did here, but they said, you know, what this community's problem is apathy and the way that we look at ourselves. And man, that gave me some cover. It gave us as an organization, it gave us as a community a chance to kind of step back and not be the first ones to call it out for that, but say, yeah, this is really what it is. And really was kind of the first salvo in us being able to start fighting back against that negativity and apathy and not just give into it.
I think that's just so critical, just to kind of name it and then let's attack it. And as you said, really fight against it, not just kind of passively, we did a facade program or we did a new branding, but really have a strategic approach to fighting apathy. So you had mentioned that you had a lot of different players come together that maybe hadn't talked to each other in a while. So I'm curious if you can just kind of describe that. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is that the public schools were involved.
Yeah.
So I'd love just to kind of hear how and why they were involved as well.
Yeah. So, you know, you mentioned the different partners, and obviously the public school is one of those, but we ended up calling it the Big Five, just because there was 5 of us. And so we were talking about it. It really started, a lot of it started with Main Street and our chamber and our county economic development. We were talking with our city government. So there ended up being 4. And then our school superintendent, we had a few conversations with them, and they ended up saying, hey, we really want to be a part of this with you. And at first it was kind of a question of like, well, why the school? It seemed kind of a little bit out of place, but at the end of the day, they touch so many members of our community. And when you think about a community and its sense of identity, for right or wrong, a lot of people think of the schools. When you think of that sense of place, but also if someone's wanting to come to our town, guess what they think about? They think about the schools. Well, where are my kids? Where are my grandkids? Those different things. How are they going to be able to impact this? And they had a lot of negativity that was stretching around them as well. And so they They had several failed bond issues. They were really struggling with apathy in both amongst students, amongst faculty. And so they're like, we need to be a part of this plan as well. And we know that we can play a role in strengthening this community and be mutually supportive to all parties.
I love that. It's a much more holistic viewpoint. And you're right, the school systems are a huge determining factor if new families are going to be moving in, how the kids are raised and what they perceive about their town. Will they, as soon as they graduate, leave and never look back only for Christmas, holidays or something like that? So
and that was a big thing, because you're right. They were oftentimes our spokesperson to these students. And we have been starting to see kids returning now after college. We've been doing this long enough. And we had kids that were saying, man, I never thought I'd come back to Beatrice, but a few people planted enough seed to say, at least give Beatrice a chance. And then they came back and like, wow, I look at our community in such a different way. And the schools were a big part of that.
That's awesome. You did mention some of the tensions that came up. How did you work through those tensions? What were those tensions? Are there still tensions?
there definitely are still tensions. I mean, it's not all sunshine and rainbows here in Beatrice, Nebraska, as much as we sometimes wish it could be. But yeah, I mean, tensions, amongst property owners of, wow, well, these people doing these other improvements is just going to increase my property taxes, or between different groups, the chamber and Main Street at times, and economic development and the city and county, and just so many different little ways, or just tensions of, why did you guys paint that mural? That's just a waste of funds, or different things like that. So trying to break through tensions, a lot of it is just staying on message. It's continuing to move forward, but it's also acknowledging that, trying to have conversations where those will be receptive, knowing when to have those conversations, when not to, but really trying to break through it. I think we had to be deliberate again. We had to understand that we're going to have those, and that truly is okay. I mean, we're all human, but making conscious efforts to try to work together and to continue putting out that message has really helped us break down those tensions and those barriers.
It's excellent. Kind of related to that, another question. So here in Connecticut, we have a lot of municipalities doing the work of Main Street and downtown revitalization versus some other communities that really have a Main Street model. I'm curious, you're a 501c3 Main Street organization, how do you interface with your municipality? What does that look like?
Yeah, so great question. So our city government in Main Street, Beatrice, haven't always worked along real well. Talk about some of those past tensions. When we first got started back in the 1990s, it was largely, we were started by an effort out of our chamber and our city government, but neither of them wanted to run it. So a group of downtown property owners kind of co-opted what was the old Merchants Association, started saying, let's try to follow the Main Street approach, a little bit of a rocky start, but the city government put money behind us to help get us started. But as we started reaching some of that negativity, some of those deep periods of apathy, and truly Beatrice was heavily affected by the recession back in the mid to early 2000s, we lost our funding. And you started having a lot of tensions between the two groups, not seeing each other the same way. We had a mayor that was very much saying, downtown's dead, folks. I don't know what to tell you. Write it off. Downtown's dead. And so that's about the time that I stepped in here. We were in financial trouble. They weren't doing real great. And, but we had a few members of city administration. We have a city administrator. We had a city attorney that I was able to start working with. And we started just doing little things and really starting to work together. And man, just opening up that conversation, putting some of our pride aside, really ended up being pretty impactful, to the point that now our city government is back to financially supporting our organization in minor ways, not real heavy, but the facility we're in, it's rent-free. and some things like that have really aided us in being able to be partners, sitting down at the same table together, forming plans together. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's times where we sit there and roll our eyes at each other. I'm sure they do it at me and I at them at times, but we have an understanding of how we can accomplish more together. And getting to that point of understanding wasn't easy, but it has made this progress we've made so much easier, so much easier.
Thank you. We have a question that came in. I believe Beatrice is a micropolitan area. So is Torrington. And in fact, we just did a spotlight on main event in Torrington. And I see a lot of parallels between Beatrice's story and Torrington's story and the great momentum that they've been doing. And so their question is, because they are micropolitan not eligible for CDBG funds, how did Beatrice have access to those funds to start their facade grant?
Yeah. So we are a micropolitan community, which that reminds me of a story I should probably say just of our rankings amongst micropolitan communities. But to get to that question about CDBG, so we are not an entitlement community. There's only a couple, 2 or 3 in the state of Nebraska that are from a population standpoint. And so our state economic development oversees programs with CDBG. And then we are able to apply through those programs for that. And I know here throughout our region, a lot of the states around us do it in a similar way. I'm not sure about Connecticut. So Kristen and some of you guys can probably better answer that question, but we are able to access downtown revitalization program dollars through CDBG through our state Department of Economic Development. We're only eligible for that program once every 3 years. Is kind of, it's, we can sometimes apply about every 2 years depending upon funding, but it's competitive. We're not entitled to it. And so we have to really be pretty deliberate and plan ahead. And we have to understand that it's not always there.
And just a point of clarification, do you apply as a 501c3 or is it the town?
So the gatekeeper is definitely our city. And so this is where a good relationship with our city government is so key, because at the end of the day, they are the eligible recipient. We as Main Street Beatrice, a 501c3 or not. And so our government is the gatekeeper on a lot of, especially federal funding and a lot of state programs. Without them being involved, we wouldn't have access.
Excellent, thanks. Please keep your questions coming. I have some more here. We can talk more about Beatrice's process. So going to the rebranding process, the stake your claim, and I love how that was tied to history. That's something that we always talk about here is, take inventory of your historical, assets and take advantage of them. So the stake your claim makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious though, kind of the mechanics of that rebranding process. How did it roll out? And I'm talking about, the key messaging, the logo, colors, things like that. How was it adopted by community players? Something that I know I've seen is you always have that like rogue person or that rogue organization that just will not adopt it, or I like this logo variation better, so I'm going to use that. Just can you speak to kind of how that was adopted?
Yeah. So again, we had 5 major organizations, which also meant we had 5 decision makers in the room, all independent of each other. And so that was a little bit of a challenge, but we did hire a marketing firm that helped us start working through and crafting that message. And we came to the message, we kind of finalized on that fairly quick. We definitely had some disagreements. Oh, should it be based in history? Is this too old fashioned? Those types of questions. Colors, man, we had hours of conversation around colors. And finally, we just had people that said, you know what? Orange really isn't my favorite color, but, or, whatever name the other colors in the palette, but I see why we need to do that. It truly makes sense for the community. And so then we moved forward. Our local sports team their main color is orange. And so, there's some things along that, but we found ways to start to work together, and it took some time. And that messaging started to really just naturally craft its way out there. And man, because we were all bought in, we were all just so excited to be doing this together. I think there was just kind of a high of, for the first time working together, it really moved along well. Now, since then, we've had a lot of turnover in a lot of these different groups, and we have lost some of that buy-in because of those types of things. And so, that being able to keep up that momentum with the brand has maybe been a little bit of a challenge. And also, brands do age. And while that one was perfect for where we were back in 2015, 2016, 2017, when that was first rolling out, we are re-envisioning things right now. And we're finding it a little more of a challenge than it was then, to keep everyone together, but it's still uniquely Beatrice, and it's telling our story, which makes it easy. We're now actually using the pronunciation of our name. A lot of people would look at Beatrice and say, well, isn't that Beatrice? Well, it's be at. And so now we're starting to look at doing a campaign on be at, and then you can start to fill that in, but it's still part of our identity and our story.
That's excellent. We have 2 more questions that came in that are slightly related, so I'll kind of group them into part 1 and 2. How have you addressed site control of blighted or tax delinquent properties? And then the other question is, can you talk more about the building acquisition, the big one, including kind of the mechanics of how that came to be?
Yeah. So as we started working through this, especially post-pandemic, one of the big challenges that we were facing really was our building stock. We knew that it was contributing to bad aesthetic. Frankly, while we have a relatively high vacancy rate, a lot of people talk about vacant buildings in our downtown, turnkey, ready to go property, it's all taken. If I have a person that wants to come in and they want to sign a lease to start their business idea tomorrow, it's really tough for them. And so we knew that our properties were a barrier to our growth. And we definitely had some property owners that unfortunately weren't exactly excited about our plan, or really just had no conversation with them. We could have tried to bring down the hammer. We did pass a vacant building ordinance and an adjoining building ordinance, but our city council kind of gutted a lot of the teeth in those ordinances. So they were helpful, but frankly, they didn't solve the problem. And so for us, we decided to just start having conversations. Frankly, picking up the phone call and having multiple conversations with property owners, multiple conversations with people that were looking at becoming investors, trying to keep them interested, even though they maybe didn't find a property that they were looking at, kind of keeping them on the hook and trying to connect people. So we've been able to slowly let the private sector take care of this, but us being a convener and just having that conversation, planting seeds in people's minds, saying, hey, listen, this property, you're starting to have problems. The city's starting to apply a little bit of pressure on you from this side, like kind of playing a little bit of good cop, bad cop at times. And just saying, listen, let's provide an out. Let's provide an out. And so we've had some property that's transitioned that way. We have, frankly, our city has come in and just bought a couple property owners out. Did they pay more than they probably should have to a delinquent property owner? Yes. But at the end of the day, the tearing down of that building was going to cost $3 million or $300,000. Them buying it was maybe $85,000. Yeah, $85,000 to a property owner that caused the problem to begin with wasn't fun. But now we've got a $500,000 renovation project going on in that building. And sometimes it's buying it for delinquent tax sale, but it's just trying all sorts of different things, from the city buying a couple of them out to us trying to be a convener, and just trying to apply a little bit of pressure on the backside has really helped us either spur investment, change hands of property. But that's been our main focus over the last 1.5 to 2 years, has been changing hands of property. In creating relationships, my goodness, just getting out there, people seeing who we are, having those conversations has opened doors. So when this senior living facility announced they were going to close last winter and close last spring for this big property, they called us and said, hey, we need your help. And so we were helping them try to bring developers through, bringing people through. We were helping that conversation, and we were hands-on, us in the city. And after they had tried selling the building for a year and didn't get the offers that they hoped for, they reached out to me on our last day of our farmers market. I'm putting out signs for our farmers market, and someone calls from there, and one of the CEO, and he goes, hey, Michael, what would you think if Main Street Beatrice, if we donated this building to you guys? And at first I was like, oh boy. I'm like, honestly, our city would probably be a better recipient for that. It's still a tax deduction. But let's start. So we started getting them together with the city. And I was joking around with my board, man, can you believe that? We almost had an opportunity to own that building. Everyone's like, yeah, that'll never happen. And then we get a couple months down the road and we had a grant opportunity, some ARPA funds for site acquisition of delinquent properties, and certainly for the idea of developing some housing potential. And so we decided that we could take advantage of this program. Our city could apply for the grant, but the grant wasn't going to pay the developer or the current owner as much money as they needed. And so they were still willing to donate it. So we were able to get them to donate it to Main Street Beatrice. We spent $30,000 worth of attorney's fees to make sure that we were above board legally and that we make our plans for this large of a donation, that we're going to be hopefully good with the IRS and everything else. It was quite a challenge. It took up a lot of time, a lot of energy, but the city will use this grant to buy the building from us, and then we will re-grant those funds back to help with the redevelopment of this property and potentially others. So we're also going to be able to leverage $1 million in grant funds for our community by our involvement and get this building rehabilitated. And so it's been a real challenge, but we're excited for it.
That's excellent. I'm really excited to see how this building progresses. But I mean, truly a testament to being a face, being a relationship broker, to see kind of how that momentum can snowball potentially in areas that you had no idea were going to happen.
No idea. And again, it was just building relationships. Again, it was about that people-focused approach in our plan, and it opened the door for this to happen. Never would have thought so otherwise.
Speaking of people, Lisa here in the chat says Connecticut ranks last in the United States in disability inclusion. Did you deal with becoming a more inclusive community at all, or is that on your radar?
It is on our radar. Being in a smaller, rural, more conservative area, when you talk about, just inclusivity, people think of things in a little different way, but we have been really working on that. We've been doing a lot of work on our sidewalks, and a lot of other things to try to increase that. Obviously, with historic properties, we try to make sure the ADA is being thought about. And through several different disabilities, we actually are home to several regional and a state developmentally disability facility. And so we've got a lot of different experience with that in the community. So it's slowly working there. It's not a core focus as far as it's not like one of the leading ideas, but it certainly has been part of that. Because again, like you said, for us to succeed, we want to be a community center for everyone in our community. And so that is a part of it. But yeah, could it be more of our focus? Certainly. But we definitely don't try to just shove it aside either.
Excellent. We're getting close to our end here, so I'll just wait a few more minutes for maybe one more question. But one of the stories that we had talked about previously, and I thought it was just a great story of speaking to skeptics that are still there despite all of the great work, and still it's not mission accomplished. It's an ongoing process. Is the story with the retired teachers? Can you just share that?
Yeah. So Beatrice has a little retired teachers group that meets at our senior center, and they reached out to me and were like, hey, we're looking for a speaker. Can you come and speak to us? And this was at the beginning of this year, it was still wintertime. And so I go out there and, I'm just going to kind of go off the cuff, kind of see where things go, but get there. And the very first comments, I'm like, so what are your guys' thoughts about downtown? Oh, we just wish it, blah, blah, blah. And they start going in about all the businesses that they remember being gone. And Thursday nights when there was all these people downtown and it was just packed all the time and just all this stuff. And it's just so sad that Beatrice has changed for the negative. And, it'll probably never be the same again, kind of a thing. And that's fairly normal when we're talking about our older members of the community. It's easier for them to remember the good old days. So we just started the conversation of, hey, Beatrice, Nebraska, we have a lot of industry. We were actually named the #1 micropolitan community in the state of Nebraska just a few years ago. We were ranked 14th in the nation. Over the last several years, we've always been in the top 3 in Nebraska, even though size-wise, we're like 15th, 20th. And at the same time, look at our downtown. Have you seen such and such new shop? What about this one? What about that one? And I list off the 10 most new businesses. And again, a net gain of 31, not just total new businesses. So we start talking about that and all the new jobs, and we start talking about the new buildings that are going on and the new housing units that are, the new apartments that are downtown. And by the end of the conversation, and we even had a couple of downtown property owners that were part of this group, by the end of the conversation, I had several of these older teachers that had retired, and they're like, man, Michael, this was eye-opening. They're like, I need to just, I realized something. I need to go downtown. I need to actually open my eyes. I need to go and look. Like I just drive through and I see that one building that used to have JCPenney's in it, and JCPenney's isn't in there anymore. And so then I paint with a broad brush. Or I see this one building that's been empty for so long, but I don't think about the 10 other new businesses on that block. And so we started talking about how we need their help to change this perception, and how we can try our hardest. And we've seen success. Beatrice is finding success. We've got great success on the manufacturing front, great success downtown. We are out punching, communities far larger than us. We've got customers all across the country for some of our products and things that, but if we want to see these things change, that we can be a part of that. And they started saying, wow, I am going to change my conversation with my friends and everything else. And I've had several people call me since and say, it's still been so impactful that it kind of changed their perception, and they became advocates for what we've talked about here today. And just in a short 30-minute conversation, 45 minutes like today.
That's excellent. I think that's a great little anecdote to close up today's session on. And it's just the fact, keep on talking, keep on telling the story. No matter how many times you might have heard it, there's someone in your community that hasn't heard it yet.
Yeah.
So Michael, thank you so much for your time this morning. I'm just going to wrap us up with a few words here. We invite you to join the 80+ communities around the state committed to improving your Main Street and becoming improved by becoming a member of Connecticut Main Street Center. Please visit our website to learn more about that. And one of the benefits of membership is receiving a Main Street Management Assessment. This is a new tool that examines 84 different points of your downtown, and it provides prioritized recommendations and next steps. And the communities that have received an assessment have found it incredibly helpful and useful to guide their strategic plans, to talk to their board and city councils. So if you are a member and haven't received yours yet, please reach out to our field services director at carl@ctmainstreet.org. And coming up next is our Main Street Management 101 webinar on July 27th. In this webinar, you'll get a high overview of Main Street management, of the 4-point approach, and ideas on how you can start implementing the approach into your Main Street. And this is great for individuals involved in their downtown or commercial corridor revitalization who are unfamiliar with the 4-point approach, or for those who need a refresher. And once again, we thank all of our sponsors and program partners. When you exit this webinar, you should be prompted to complete an evaluation. Please do. It really helps us shape our programming for you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.